Sugarcane is on the short list for an Oscar nomination in the documentary category. Julian, what was that moment like for you when you saw in December that this film had been shortlisted?
I mean, there's so many amazing documentaries this year, so to be included in a conversation with any of them is just the highest praise. We actually had I was on a plane when it came out, so it was a bit of a muted celebration for me, and we got to screen the film at the White House that night. And then my dad, unfortunately, due to like many Indians, he has a record, so he was unable to get into the White House. So it kind of got all overshadowed by that experience. But obviously, incredible thing to have a film shortlisted for an Academy Award. I mean, what a crazy thing to be able to even say.
And Emily, take us back to the beginning. How did the two of you start working together, and how did you end up making this film?
Yeah, absolutely. I am an investigative journalist and documentary filmmaker, and I've spent about a decade reporting and making films about human rights conflicts and abuses all over the world, from Afghanistan to Rwanda. But I had never turned my lens on my own country. I'm born and raised in Toronto, and I knew next to nothing about the residential schools. And so, like many, when the news hit of potential unmarked graves on the grounds of the Kamloops Indian Residential School, I felt horrified and drawn towards the story. And the first thing I did was reach out to Julian, and that's because we worked our first reporting jobs together a decade ago. We were randomly sat at the desk next to each other, and Julian had gone on to become an incredible reporter and storyteller focusing on Indigenous life in North America. So we felt like a natural partner for a project like this. What I didn't know is that I would go on to find a nation that was doing a search and agree to work with them and follow their search. And what I didn't know is that I had picked the exact school where Julian's family attended and where his father was born.
Wow.
So Julian called me back about a couple weeks later to let me know he'd be open to working on it, and that's when I shared with him that I was following the search at St. Joseph's Mission.
In the film, we do hear from survivors of the St. Joseph's Mission residential school, including former Williams Lake Chief Rick Gilbert and a survivor. An investigator, Charlene Belleau. Can you ever prepare as a filmmaker? And I guess this question is for both of you, obviously, but Julian, I know you have a very personal connection to this, and this is a part of how you grew up. But can you ever prepare yourself for the stories, the firsthand stories your subjects are going to tell you? Because we see you react, Julian.
I think that the point of a documentary like this is to experience that emotion. The purpose of, I think, telling a film in the way that we chose to tell it, a verite documentary, is to understand the present stakes of the residential schools in this, particular work. And that requires an emotional engagement with the material, with being present with your subjects and allowing their emotion, and as well as your own relationship to that history and lived experience to be communicated through the film.
And you yourself ask a lot of questions in the film that are met with silence.
Yeah, I mean, that was something that when the initial discovery of the for unmarked graves at Kamloops happened in May of 2021, there was this common refrain that you heard on media, including the CBC sometimes, that Indigenous peoples had been talking about this, forever, and nobody had been listening. And when I heard that, that really didn't ring true to my experience. My experience was that I grew up in a family where there were these lingering ghosts of the history of colonization, that I didn't fully understand what they came from and how they impacted my father and my own life. I had chosen to learn Tsq'secen, my indigenous language, from my kia, who attended residential school. And when you learn a language that is basically now dead from someone who had that language taken from them at these schools, you naturally ask about the schools. And when I asked those questions, I was similarly met with largely a lot of silence about that history. And so that was something that I felt really strongly that I wanted to convey through this film. And I think that the way that and Chris were, with our subjects as cinematographers, allowed that experience to breathe, and then ultimately, for those silences to speak in some instances louder than what people chose to share.
And Emily, for you as a person who didn't have a personal connection to the film, when you heard the stories, tell me about your own reaction, because some of this you would have heard for the first time.
Yeah, I heard all of these stories really for the first time. The last year of residential schools was my first year of kindergarten, and I was taught nothing about it. And so the way we decided to make this film was not to, necessarily just extract interviews from people, but rather live alongside the community. So for 2.5 years, we lived in community on and off and shot 160 days and witnessed these kind of large emotional journeys of our protagonists, survivors who are reckoning with these, long buried secrets and painful memories for the first time and having their first conversations about them. And it was extraordinary to witness. On the one hand, it was incredibly painful and horrific to process what had been done to 6 generations of families and to children. And at the same time, it was profound to witness just extraordinary courage of survivors who were willing to confront and hold the church and government accountable, like the late Chief Rick Gilbert, who travels all the way to the Vatican and confronts the head of the Catholic order that abused him. And so that was a really remarkable experience for me.
I'd like to hear both of you react to this. Yesterday, we heard Donald Trump giving his version of American history during his inauguration speech. Here's one of the things he said, among many, and this is a quote: "Our American ancestors turned a small group of colonies on the edge of a vast continent into a mighty republic of the most extraordinary citizens on earth." Julian, I'm wondering what you think of that interpretation of American history.
Our documentary tells a very different story about the origin of not just Canada, but North American settler society in general. And I think that tells a story of people who were denied some of the most basic human rights. The ability to raise your own children, to perpetuate your own culture and language, and also it tells a story of shocking abuse towards very young children, including members of my own family and my own people. And I think that it's very hard for people to come to terms with the fact that that is what not just one particular arm of society like the church perpetrated against Indigenous peoples, but that in fact many different tentacles of society were involved in this. That it was supported by law enforcement, that it had the support of the legislatures, that these institutions were getting loans from banks, that it was reported on in the local news as a documentary. And I think that leads to very hard conversations that are not often celebratory ones.
All right. And Emily, for you, what do you think of that interpretation?
I think it's really interesting to hear where people decide to start the story of American history. And I think that we argue with Sugarcane that this is the foundational story of how the land was taken and how vast communities of a flourishing people were subjugated and oppressed by settlers and colonialism. So that's a different and this story is being told for the first time and correcting the record. And I think unfortunately we're in a moment of revisionism and of polarization where some of America's worst instincts may be overpowering its best. And I think that we can only hope as journalists and storytellers that we continue to do the work to illuminate, wrongdoing and corruption and encourage people to have compassion and understand experiences of hardship beyond their own.
It is a pleasure to hear from both of you today. Thank you so much for taking the time with us. We really appreciate it, and I really enjoyed the film. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
All right, take care.
Really appreciate it, Stephen.
Okay, bye-bye now. That's Julian Brave Noisecat and director Emily Kassie as well, also a director and producer and cinematographer. The film is Sugarcane. It is screening online at Disney Plus and Hulu. The 97th Oscars will be held on March 2nd in Los Angeles. And that was my conversation with the filmmakers behind the documentary Sugarcane. Again, that conversation was from Tuesday morning, just a couple of days ago. The film was among 5 films nominated for Best Documentary Feature at the Academy Awards.